Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Today we are beginning a course called Introduction to Fiqh or Introduction to Jurisprudence. Now, this short course gets you familiar with what fiqh actually is, what jurisprudence actually is, and the important terminology related to fiqh, related to jurisprudence. Also, in this course, inshallah, we will discuss some important topics along the way, like tasamu fi adilla as-sunan, the leniency in the rulings for the mustahabat and the makruhat, and why some scholars disagree with that principle. And we are going to talk about the resources of fiqh. What are the primary resources in which we derive and use to derive the rulings from? Then we're going to have a brief overview of the different abwab or chapters in Islamic jurisprudence. So, first thing we must talk about is the terminology of jurisprudence. You may ask yourself, why is it important to learn the special or particular terminology of the jurist? Why? Why do I need to know the specific terminology of the jurist? Can't someone just tell me yes or no? Learning the terminologies used in the language of the jurist becomes very important and very beneficial. Why? Because it enlightens us in understanding and interpreting the words of the jurist himself. The jurist is like a doctor. You know, a doctor goes through education and he works with specific terminologies. Now, when you talk to a doctor, if you know their terminologies, you will be able to understand them very well. But if you don't know their terminology, if they talk to you in the way they would with other doctors, you'll be left confused. The jurist talks in a specific and careful language, which indicates his views, his derivations, his positions on various matters. And if we don't have that understanding of what he means, we will misinterpret him. Just like if we have a text in any particular science, yes, we will understand that text in its basic, simple, or common English language. Yet this text, as example, could be a medical text or a text on physics. Now, when we go to attempt to read this text, to analyze this text, we will face many problems in front of us. We will face many issues related to our understanding of that particular text. We may get through some sentences, but eventually we will hit roadblocks. We will be left with astonishment or confusion on what actually is meant by this sentence, these words. We may face big hurdles and roadblocks. We may even altogether give up researching and reading this particular text. Because why? Because it makes little to no sense. to us. We can't understand it because we're not familiar with the scientific language of the author or of the specific field of study. On the other hand, an expert in that science, say you have a physicist or a doctor, he goes and picks up a text related to his science, or a person who has studied some things about that science, they will be able to read the same text with a different understanding, with a more clear and precise insight. And they will benefit from the text. So it will make sense to them. This is similar to our situation over here when it relates to jurisprudence. That is, if we do not know the terminologies of the jurist or of the jurisprudential sciences, rather, when we attempt to read their answers or their fatwa or their masal books, we will face many hurdles. We will face barriers and roadblocks to understanding properly what they are saying. We may even misunderstand them. We may even misunderstand them because sometimes some issues that they bring fatwa or they say something, but you should, if you have an understanding in the terminology and some of the basic general principles of fiqh, then you understand them correctly. So we may misunderstand them or misinterpret them if we don't have the right background in the science at a basic level. Due to this reason, it becomes very important to learn and study a little bit about the terminology and the language of the jurist. So that why? So that we may understand better what he actually means. Okay, so now you see that the understanding the terminology has an importance. Now, the very first thing that we should talk about when it comes to understanding definitions or terminologies is what actually is fiqh. So here we have the literal and the technical definitions. In any science, when you begin to study a science, you want to introduce or understand the literal definition, or even any subject actually, the literal definition and the technical definition, the lugawi definition and the istilahi definition. So one of the first things that we should talk about over here is that whenever we study a particular science or a discipline, we have to define and clarify some terminologies because sometimes a word may mean something in its literal meaning, yet the same exact word in a particular science or in a number of sciences may have a different technical meaning. For example, you may have heard of the science of logic. We call it ilmu mantiq. The word mantiq, you may interpret it as meaning logic. In the Arabic language, this word is giving the meaning of the place of speech. Mantiq is indicating speech. It comes from nataka, to speak. Hence, this word, when it's used in narrations or in the Quran, etc., it will give this kind of meaning. However, after the the arrival of the Greek sciences into the Muslim world, this word began to be used for the science of logic. Why? Because some say that maybe it's because that you cannot speak without universal concepts, without logical concepts. So anyways, or without rationality, you cannot like properly like speak, you cannot properly communicate without these things or understand communication. Hence, the word used in narrations in the Quran and and narrations will be different, right, than the technical meaning. However, when we look at the sciences, we notice there is a science called ilm mantiq, the science of formal logic. Over here, the word mantiq is defined specially in that science to mean logic. To mean logic. Logic is the science which gives some principles or rules that, if adhered to, should immunize the mind from making mistakes in its thinking. Okay. Therefore, we have two ways to look at a specific word in regards to a particular science. The first is the literal definition, the literal meaning, a lugawi meaning. And the second is the technical definition or meaning, the istilahi definition or meaning. Now, with that understanding, now let's come and arrive at the word fiqh. The word fiqh has a similar situation. It has a literal meaning and a technical meaning. So let us first consider its literal aspect. The word fiqh gives the meaning of profound or deep understanding. If you want to say, what is the meaning of fiqh? It is profound or deep understanding. Now you see, now when you face that literal definition, that literal meaning, it is much more broad, much more vast than how you have understood the word fiqh before knowing that. You may have thought fiqh just means the rules, the wajib, mustahab, haram, makruh. No, the word fiqh means literally a deep or profound understanding. Hence, it is more than an understanding about the ahkam. Ahkam means the rulings. It's plural of rulings. Rather, it is a deep understanding of all things about the religion. We find in the Holy Quran in Surah Tawbah, Surah 9, ayat 122. وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَةً فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفات ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. Now, before I give you the meaning of this in English, let me clarify something you'll hear from me many times, is that I say these English meanings of the Quran are transinterpretations. Translation plus interpretation. It's not simply a translation. You can't really translate the Quran or any text in original language 100% precisely into another language. So an element of interpretation goes into the text. So this is why it becomes now important and very important for you to master and learn the Arabic language. Because if you really want to understand the text, you want to really clearly understand it the best you can, you need to understand it in its origin. And you can see an example of this, of how problematic not understanding the text could be, when you look at English understandings of Hebrew Bible as example. If you go and investigate those things, or Greek text, it could become very problematic, because they've interpreted, and you see so many different interpretations of it, of New Testament or Bible, and they can vastly differ. So anyways, the English transinterpretation of this noble ayatis, and it does not beseem the believers that they should go forth altogether, right? So I think this is part of the ayat we have here. Why should not then a company or a group, ta'ifa, a group from every party, a firqa, minhum ta'ifa. So a firqa is like a group, and ta'ifa is like a group. So they're different words here. But they have some you could do some research on them. So we stick with the transinterpretation. It says, why should not then a company from every party go from among them? Why should not then a company from every party from among them go forth, that they may apply themselves to obtaining understanding in religion? This was liyatafaqahu fi dini. See, the word fiqh is there. The root word is fiqh. This is a fi'l mudariya. It's a present tense verb, and is plural, right? But it's from the root verb, the root of that fiqh comes from. So why do not they not go to gain a deep understanding in religion, and that they may warn their people? So why should you learn the religion? Why should you study diniyat? Why should you study the fiqh? Why should you study it all? Why should you get a deep understanding? لِيُنذِيرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ, that they warn their people when they come back to them, in hopes that they may be yahzarun. He's transinterpreted as cautious here, but you could look into that. Okay. However, as time went on, you see, it had this literal meaning, but as time went on, the meaning became more narrow. The usage of the term fiqh became used for the area of research related to the laws and the rulings of the Islamic code of law, the legislative system. Like, how do you pray? How do you do wudu? How do you fast? How do you make a valid marriage contract? How do you do a valid divorce? What animals are permissible to eat? How do you make an animal permissible to eat? All of these things. Hence, today, when we refer to the study of fiqh or jurisprudence, we are referring to the study of the sections related to the laws. We're not using that literal meaning anymore. While in this study, we can note that there are levels. There are levels of study. Hence, at the initial level, a person learns the rulings he or she needs for their daily life. They must do that. Everything you need to be able to fulfill your wajib and stay away from haram in your daily life, you must learn. You must know it. This is your responsibility to seek that knowledge. So this is, intellectually, you have to secure your place in obedience to Allah the Exalted. So a person at this initial level learns the rulings he or she needs for their daily life. securing their responsibilities and duties. Then one may actually go higher. They may go into research higher levels, and they may study then all the masail of his scholar. Then he may begin to study the methodologies and the sciences of how the experts arrive at their rulings, after which he or she may study how to arrive at the rulings and practice arriving at the rulings from their resources. By who? By themselves. They become a qualified expert scholar themselves. This is possible. One can do this and research this. It takes time, maybe 12, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Hopefully not that long. But it's a lot to cover. It's an ocean of topics. And just to get the initial taste of it takes maybe 7, 8, 10 years. So this is what the mujtahid, mujtahid means jurist, the one who is a jurist, at least for himself, and also there is those who are the jurists for people to follow. This is what the jurist is. He or she can arrive at the rulings from their resources. And here there are two types of jurists, two types of experts. There's this partial expert, and this is what the scholars become as they study more and more. They become partial experts. Kind of like they're putting the puzzle pieces together until they complete the puzzle, and they become a complete expert. So here you can have a partial expert and a complete expert. The partial expert is able and has ideas and understandings and derivations of rulings from their resources only in some areas of fiqh, while the complete expert can derive rulings and has derived rulings in all the sections of the Islamic account. So here, there can be yet another division. That is the qualified expert who is only an expert for himself, and the qualified expert who is allowed and qualified to have others emulate him in his findings. This is called taqleed, and he is called the marja taqleed. Taqleed comes from a word that means like necklace. So what you're doing with taqleed is you found an expert who you have itmitnan. Itmitnan is like 98% sure, 99% sure, confidence, satisfaction that this person is the expert who's able to tell me the rulings from the resources. I trust that this person, I have certitude that this person is. And now when he tells you something, you put his rulings around your neck, like around your neck. You're following him in it. And he's supposed to be certain, have itmitnan or certitude in everything he says. So rather than you doing all the research on these thousands of issues, you do the research on one issue. Who is qualified enough for me to follow? Who do I have certitude of? And then he does the research on all the other areas. Okay, so that is about the terminology of fiqh. Now, quickly, before I end the lesson, I want to talk about the different topics we have in the Hawza. So the importance of the the important sciences for fiqh, the important sciences that a scholar should master, should be familiar with to be able to approach deriving rulings from their resources, or what we call istinbat. To properly study the resources and deduce laws from their sources, a number of disciplines and sciences should be studied. Some important ones are as follows. First, we have the study of the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran is the most important resource for us. Lacking an understanding of the Quranic text can harm our understanding of the narrations. Dramatically, it could harm it. Even we may end up accepting narrations which would otherwise be rejected due to its opposition to the Holy Quran. In our own ignorance of it, we would accept a hadith that the Quran, if we were to compare it, would be rejected. And this is what the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam taught us, that if a hadith comes and it opposes the Quran, to throw it against the wall. Now, of course, sometimes these are very subtle things, and an expert has to determine and figure this out. Sometimes maybe it'll be very clear. Clearly, it's against Quran. So here, if we don't have knowledge of the Quran, how are we going to be able to determine this principle when dealing with the narrations? Even so this could happen in our own ignorance. Also, there are around 480 to 500 verses called Ayatul Akam. Now, scholars historically from the Shia and the Sunni, they disagree about the number. Some have even listed a large number. But one of my teachers said 480. Usually they say 500 or around 500 probably is a safe way to say it. So what are these Ayatul Akam? These are verses of the Quran which are related to law. These are verses in the Quran which are related to law. Out of the 6,200 some verses of the Quran, only about 500, around 500, relate to law. So if we don't understand those verses, though, then that's a big defect in our understanding. So the Quran is very, very important. The Quranic studies. And then you have different studies there, things that you would study in relation to Quran. The next important thing, which maybe should be along with that, or basically, primarily with that, is the study of the Arabic language. Here you have now grammar, sarf, morphology, balagha, eloquence, mufradat, vocabulary. And all these have different studies in different areas. Modern Arabic in its vocabulary is not exactly the same as classical Arabic. Balagha has certain rules, eloquence has certain rules, sarf has certain rules, grammar has certain rules, which all affect our understanding of the text. So if we are not familiar enough with these sciences, we will run into problems in understanding the text. All of these are important to understand when examining both the text of the Holy Quran and the narrations, without which we will surely lose something and get things wrong. So it's very important. The next science which is important to study to be able to derive rulings from their resources is ilm mantiq, logic. Logic is a tool science where we learn how to make syllogisms and develop arguments. Hence, it is useful in all sciences to be able to immunize the mind from making mistakes in its thinking. Without proper logical understanding, we may make fallacies in our understanding and thoughts, and we may end up falling into sophistry and false things. The next science, which is very important to study, is ulum al-hadith, ilm al-hadith, the study of narrations. The faqih, the jurist, must have a good grounded knowledge of narrations, and also must be able to differentiate between different types of narrations. As well, he or she must become familiar with the language of the Imams alayhim salam in those narrations. So all of this comes with years of study of those narrations and the sciences about those narrations. The next important study related to istinbat is the study of ilmu rijal. Now, rijal means men, but there are some women narrators. Um, but it means here we don't translate it as the science of men. It's the science of narrators. Narrators, those who narrate from the Prophet or the Imams. Rijal is the science where we study the principles on how to authenticate narrators. Hence, this is an essential tool in the toolbox of the jurist and can change the results of the rulings. Why? Because if we find a narration is reliable, we have a piece of evidence. If we find it's weak, that evidence is no use to us to derive a ruling. It's important because there have been fabricators, and some of their narrations have arrived to us and been mixed in our books. No doubt, there have been fabricators and liars, and their narrations are also in our books. So we need to have a tool to filter them out. In fact, some of the gulat are the exaggerators. Um, they are exaggerators. They place the imams or the prophet in a level higher than Allah has made for them. Yeah. Some of the gulat they made hadith and placed them in some of the books. So you had this phenomenon going on during the time of the Imams alayhim salam, of the gulat, the exaggerators, and some of them had made false hadith and made exaggerated claims, and those hadith have also ended up in our books or in some of the books. The last and really the most important when we come over here is the backbone of the Hausa. This is called usul fiqh. Usul fiqh, the principles of fiqh. This is like the logic of fiqh, how to derive the rulings. And here, a person studies the principles by which one derives rulings from their resources. This is the methodology of the jurist. Hence, here you gain a method by which you will see as useful in regards to certitude and itmitnan in the rulings. And in fact, this is where we study that. What is the value of itmitnan, certitude? What is the value of then, probability? How do we deal with conflicting narrations? What do we do about the apparent meaning? Is it authority on us? All these types of things. Also, principles, practical principles. When we lack evidence, principle of bara'ah, exemption, principle of ittiyat. Where do we use those? This is all studied in usul fiqh. And there the jurist goes through different levels. The first level is like an introductory, and then it could get more intense. And then there's disagreements among scholars in these areas, just like fiqh. After this, one can take these sciences, after they've mastered them a bit, and use them when gathering together the resources and arriving at the rulings. Of course, the responsibility and with awareness that Allah the Exalted is present and witness to your actions. And you are blameworthy if you don't have certitude, or at least in absence of 100% certitude, you have itmitnan. You must always be aware of this fact. The other thing is that we scholars must be children of the evidence. Wherever the caravan of the evidence and proof goes, that is where we must go. We cannot say that something is haram without proof. We cannot say something is wajib without proof. We cannot say something is mustahab without proof. We cannot say something is makruh without proof. And we will talk about more issues, inshallah, in the next lesson. Wa akhiru dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.